Evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. Going to be having a chat to a good friend of mine and somebody I've got an awful lot of respect for in just a minute, Captain Paul Watson. Just to say the format for tonight, we're going to spend about half an hour having a chat, have a short break, and then we're going to have half an hour of questions and answers. So if you're watching this and there's something that you want to know from me or from Paul, get pinging them in now on Facebook, and we'll see if we can get around to them in the second half of the show. So let's kick off. Let's invite Paul into the frame.
Hi, Dale.
Paul, there you are. How you doing, buddy?
Wonderful, thank you.
Nice one. It's been a long time. I think it's been a few years since we last met. I was just recalling the other day, I think it was Saint-Tropez in France. We both just happened to be there. I think I was on holiday and I think you were on the run from an Interpol warrant or something like that. But things have moved on a bit.
Yeah. I'm stuck here in the U.S. now for a while, but that Interpol thing is being resolved, though. Costa Rica dropped the charges against us or against me, and that was after the new government was elected, which shows you how political it was. If it was judicial, they couldn't have done that. But Japan is after me, and the Interpol Red List is for serial killers, war criminals, and major drug traffickers, and I'm the only person in the history of that list to be put on there for the charge of conspiracy to trespass on a whaling ship. Didn't even do it, just conspiracy to do it.
Oh, that's impressive. You remind me, I've got a charge on my rap sheet, criminal damage to beans, and that actually comes about from an event called, it was the Battle of the Bean Field. It was in the 80s, and about 600 of us got arrested by the riot cops, not just arrested, but beaten up, smashed up. What we actually did was to drive from one field to another to try and escape, and it was a bean field. We ran over some beans trying to save ourselves. And at the end of the day, all they could find to charge us with was criminal damage to the beans. So that's on my rap sheet. Not as glorious as your Interpol Red List thing, but there it is.
Oh, we're one of your shirts.
Yes, good point. Good point. I love what you guys are doing. Somebody asked me the other day, like, when we first met, and I recall, I think it was around about 2010, and first time I bumped into you guys was, I read a piece in The Guardian about some guys in a boat in the South Atlantic harassing the whalers down there and running out of fuel. And I remember sending an email to your HQ, I think it was in America, and send it a few times to get an answer to say, guys, can I help you with some fuel money? Eventually got through, sent you some cash, and I think it was the next summer that you came to London and then popped out into the country, and we had a chat in Stroud. I remember that in the pub. I don't know, you probably recall it.
Absolutely, I was very excited to see your windmill.
Yes. Yeah, that's still there. I mean, that is like, I can't do the maths. I think it's 26 years old this year, something like that. It's done an amazing job. Things have moved on quite considerably for me in the things I've been doing for you as well. Actually, I mean, you guys, you've gone from one boat to, I think you describe yourselves having the largest private navy in the world now, and you've got some beautiful ships as well.
Yeah, the largest marine conservation navy in the world, I guess, non-government really. But actually, we have ships in many governments really now.
Yeah, you'll soon have more than the British Navy, I think, at this rate. So I don't know if we've got any questions popping in for now, but as soon as we do, I think will chime in and give us a prod. But how's life for you these days? I mean, you're back in the States, that you must be pleased about that.
Yeah, well, no, I'd rather be in Europe, really.
Oh, okay.
But I'm here in Vermont, which actually, of all the 50 states, is probably the safest state because of this pandemic. There's the fewest cases. It's also probably the most educated state, so it's a nice place, and live up in the mountains with the bears and the beavers, and things are fine.
That's pretty nice, because we watch what's happening over there with some interest, I would say. You know, the election, Trump refusing to concede that he's lost, all that kind of stuff is like reality TV over here.
Hey, Paul. Good
hi.
to meet you. I'm Will. I've got some of the questions tonight. First one in, do you think there is this lockdown and this slowdown around the planet? Is this helping the seas at all?
Well, it's actually resulted in an increase in poaching because the poachers take advantage of situations like this, like they did with the Ebola problem in Africa. So there's been a reduction in industrial fishing by only about 10%. But so I don't think it has presented obstacles for us because our crew have to go into quarantine before joining the ships. And one of our vessels, the Ocean Warrior, was stuck in Singapore from February until now. It just got released, couldn't because of the port restrictions. But we're out there, and just this week arrested a trawler, an industrial trawler in the waters of Benin and in West Africa, and we're taking actions everywhere around the world right now because we're operating in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean, the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, and unfortunately, there's a lot of poaching operations that we need to contend with.
You and Dale have both been sharing views about zoonotic viruses throughout lockdown. Dale, we'll start with you. What do you think it is about the pandemic, and what can people? Do you think this is now the new norm? We're going to see more of these.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's the old norm, actually. I think there are about 30 of these known to be in existence, viruses that have traveled from animals to humans. I think 3/4 of them have come from factory farming, and the others have come indirectly from wildlife due to the encroachment of factory farming on habitats. And, I think the virus crisis for me is really quite instructive because at its core, it's got all of the key elements of the big crisis that we're facing, the climate crisis. It is caused by our diets, the factory farming of animals. It was spread around the world at breakneck speed by the mad degree to which people fly. And it was actually made worse. It was made more fatal by air pollution from the burning of fossil fuels. Anybody exposed to air pollution was much more likely to die from it, is still much more likely to die from it. And so it has the three key elements of the climate crisis: energy, transport, and food, and the bad choices that we've been making. And I hope that it serves as a big wake-up call for us, because there's no vaccine for the climate crisis, and there's no social distancing possibility as well to save us from the climate crisis. It's such a bigger deal, and if we don't grasp it, and in the next few years, then I think we have a really big problem.
And Paul, you were saying that the human body's a pretty good place for viruses to target, right?
Yeah, well, Laurie Garrett wrote a book in 1995 called The Coming Plague, and it really illustrates, back then what we were about to face. There's been so many emerging viruses: hantavirus, West Nile virus, Ebola, SARS, MERS, and for the most part, they were ignored. This one hit globally, so it's hard to ignore. It's not affecting Africans; it's affecting Americans and Europeans, and therefore people are paying attention to it. But it's really a harbinger of more to come, because, as Dale said, the diminishment of ecosystems, diminishment of species, that's causing a problem for viruses associated with those systems and with those species. They have to go somewhere. And we're pretty attractive, 8 billion of us. And so those species which are closely related to everything from bats to primates, they're going to jump. And they're going to jump into us. And that's going to happen more and more. And on top of that, we have melting permafrost, which is releasing pathogens that have been dormant for 20, 40,000 years. And who knows what the problems there. Already there was an anthrax outbreak in northern Finland a couple of years ago, killed quite a few reindeer and a few people. And that, I think, is just a warning of things to come. Zoonotic transmission of viruses is one of the consequences of climate change. And we're really going to see more and more of it. And we can only be in denial for so long.
You're both quite vocal about meat production and running vegan operations. Why aren't more businesses doing this yet? Why aren't more people doing it? And we'll start with you on that, Paul.
Well, I think that, again, people are in denial of the problems. Factory farms are like really petri dishes, and they're extremely destructive. The slaughter of 65 billion animals every year, and I'm not even counting the fish, is the single greatest contributor to groundwater pollution, the single greatest contributor to dead zones in the ocean, the single greatest contributor to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. It has to be done away with. And you know, but there's so many vested interests that are keeping it going. And of course, you know, when we're dealing with seafood or fish, really, what we're talking about is like 40% of everything taken out of the ocean is taken to feed domestic animals, whether it be chickens or pigs or domestic salmon. And again, incredible waste, and it's also spreading diseases. The salmon industry, the domestic salmon industry is spreading viruses to indigenous fish populations in Chile, in Tasmania, in British Columbia, Newfoundland, Norway. And right now there's a major disease hitting the salmon populations in Norway. And this is going to get worse and worse. And also, I forgot to mention Scotland is being affected by this too. We really have got to learn to live in harmony with all other species and within the ecosystems that you know, if we don't, then we're not going to survive. And as I keep saying over and over again, if the fish disappear, the ocean dies. And if the ocean dies, well, we all die. We don't live on this planet with a dead ocean. And since 1950, there's been a 40% diminishment in phytoplankton populations in the ocean. And if phytoplankton disappears, so do we. It provides 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe.
Scary stuff. Yeah, we'll just have a go at the same question. You know, I think people have a blind spot to what's going on. I think the rate of consumption of animal products has been meteoric in the last 50 years or so. It's not normal. It's just become the new normal. And you know, a couple of generations of people have been brought up this way to think that it's the right thing to eat, that it's healthy food, that you have to have it. I think there's a widespread blind spot to the inhumanity, the barbarism of animal farming. And when people are exposed to that, it makes them question their food choices, and we have to do more on that front. I think veganism has risen in popularity in the last couple of years in particular, off the back of, I think, rising awareness. The internet has helped massively in that respect, and also the rising availability of products, you know, vegan food in supermarkets, in fast food outlets. I think it was just in the last week or so that McDonald's announced that they were going to have a plant burger, the McPlant, you know, and these are like really major steps in making plant-based food more available and making people aware in the process that there is another way to eat, there is another choice, and that actually the conventional choice of animals is a bad one.
Well, also in any ecosystem, the prey always outnumber the predator. And so there simply isn't any room on the planet for 8 billion meat-eating primates. It's a completely unnatural situation. But you know, a lot of people who eat meat call themselves, well, you know, we're carnivores like the lions and like the tigers and everything. No, we're necrovores. The meat that we eat has been dead for months. You know, we're more closely related in our eating habits to vultures, jackals, and you know, other carrion eaters, really. And that's really what we are. Nobody actually is a carnivore because nobody jumps on an animal and kills it and, you know, eats the raw blood and everything else. So it's so really we have to admit what we are, necrovore.
Thank you to the hundreds of you already tuned in and watching. The main purpose for tonight is just for Dale and for Paul to have a chat, but there's a couple of things you can do because Sea Shepherd always needs funds and they need supporting to do the work that they do. If you switch to Ecotricity, we're a green energy, renewable energy provider in the UK. If you switch up to £60, we donate to Sea Shepherd annually. There's other methods too. Forest Green Rovers, the world's first vegan football club, has an amazing third shirt based on the camouflage from Sea Shepherd boats. All proceeds from those shirts, if you go to fgr.co.uk, you can go and buy a shirt there and all proceeds find their way back to Sea Shepherd. I had promised to do questions from you in the second half, but I've just seen a question so incredible, I have to ask it now. This is from Phil on Facebook. Can environmentalists like you make any real difference in the world?
Well, I think we have actually. Well, I mean, what you've done with energy in the UK has made an incredible difference, and I think our anti-poaching activities have also made a difference. I mean, in the last year, we've shut 54 poaching operations of now 56 now in African waters because of our interventions. If the endangered vaquita porpoise would now be extinct if we hadn't been doing what we've been doing for the last 7 years. But it's not just a question of Dale or I making a difference. It's a question of each and every one of us understanding that we have the potential, all of us, to make a difference. All we have to do is harness whatever we're passionate about to the virtues of imagination and courage. And we can change the world. And I think not just us, but many people have demonstrated that. Because of Diane Fossey, we still have mountain gorillas. Look at what Jane Goodall has done. Because of David Wingate, a biologist in Bermuda, the Bermuda storm petrel did not go extinct. And I can't think of anything more noble than to leave a legacy that because you intervened, a species didn't go extinct, or a species or a whole ecosystem was protected.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you guys have done great work and served those other people you mentioned, but also reminded that this same argument used to come out, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe, when recycling was a new thing in Britain. People used to say, wow, what difference does it make if I recycle or if I don't recycle? And the fact is, when we all recycle, we make an enormous difference. And rates of recycling in our country now are super high. And as you say, Paul, back in the 80s, 90s, when we got involved and created the concept of green energy, it was not available in the world at that time. Britain had almost no renewable energy. Today, last quarter, National Grid reported 50% of the electricity on the grid in Britain was from green sources, renewable energy, which is amazing progress in 25 years. And so I would say to that question, absolutely, we can make a difference. Just got to get our heads down and keep going, like Paul has, like we do, and all those other people that Paul mentioned, because individually and collectively, we can make an enormous difference, and we are.
Here's a question as well. Have you both been different for as long as you can remember? So, Paul, you've been described as insane for shooting a boy who was attacking a bird. And Dale, you got a diagnosis on the autism spectrum in the last few years. What is it about people who, like yourselves, who really make a difference? Do you have to be different? Do you have to be special to do it?
Well, I don't think we're special or different. I started getting involved because the beavers that I knew in Eastern Canada that I swam with, I found that trappers had taken them out. That made me angry, and I began to free the animals and destroy the traps. And the incident you're referring to, Dixie Lee Ray, the governor, the late governor of Washington State, in her book, which was an anti-environmentalist book, she said, evidence of Watson's insanity can be found that when he was 12, he shot a boy in the rear end with a BB gun who was about to shoot a bird. And my response to her was, in my town, every boy shot every other boy with a BB gun. I just happened to have a practical reason to shoot the kid that I did.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And okay, from my go at the same question, I don't think you have to be different or crazy to make a difference, but maybe if you are, it helps, just to paraphrase that old expression. Somebody once called me an autistic freak. It was many years ago, and he was losing in an argument to me by email, and I took it as a compliment. I thought that's pretty cool, actually. Didn't bother me at all. But people on the spectrum have what I think is a superpower, actually, the ability to focus and shut out everything else, the ability to be obsessive really about something. And I don't think that can be a bad thing, particularly when pursuing a cause in such need of great heavy lifting as the environment has in the last few decades. So, I don't think you have to be, but if you are, it probably helps.
Also, as well, another thing that's interesting, you're both, I see you both as insanely determined people. And Paul, something else I heard about you that was really interesting, you were guided by some advice from Russell Means under gunfire. Could you share that with us?
Well, in 1973, I volunteered to be a medic with the American Indian Movement during the occupation of Wounded Knee in South Dakota. And we were surrounded by 3,000 federal agents who were shooting at us. 20,000 rounds a night they were shooting into the village. They wounded 46, killed 2. I went to Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian Movement, and I said, look, there's no chance we can't win. The odds are against us. It's impossible. Why are we continuing to do this? And the answer he gave me really has stayed with me all my life. He said, look, we're not concerned about the odds against us, and we're not concerned about winning or losing. We're here because it's the right thing to do, the right place to be, and the right time to do it. Focus on the present, and it will define what the future will be. Don't worry about the future. Concentrate on doing what you can in the present, and that will make all the difference. Because you can't change the future unless you take action in the present.
That's brilliant advice, Des. And you know, I've had a few situations myself, very similar, not similar in terms of being shot at or anything like that, but in terms of the concepts at stake. You know, been facing what looked like insurmountable odds, been threatened with the destruction of everything that I was doing, bankruptcy, or in one particular case, the taking away and the breaking of the electric highway, and that kind of stuff. And often the conversation has been just like that. Look, you know, you can't win. Everything is at risk. You shouldn't be doing this. And I had the same reaction as the Indian guy. Actually, that's not right, because what's at stake is principle, and that's the most important thing. And nothing else matters, actually. Whether you win or lose, it doesn't matter. But the principle is what matters the most. So
you're both you've both got incredible energy and vigor, and I know from working with Dale, he's got more energy than people I've worked with half of his age. But where does the next generation of Captain Pauls and Dale Vinces come from? Where do you see them? Can anybody step up and do what you guys have been doing?
Well, I think answering for Sea Shepherd, we've already seen that. Captain Peter Hammerstead, who's organized our African campaigns, he started when he was 18 years old. He's now in his mid-30s and still going strong. Lamy Essamlamy, who organized and leads Sea Shepherd France. Alex Cornelissen, who is head of Sea Shepherd Global. I mean, we have dozens of captains now and dozens of officers and hundreds of volunteers. I don't have to worry about the future there as far as you know, who's going to lead and run Sea Shepherd operations. It's already taking place.
Nice one. And I would say, look, the world has Greta, the school strike organization that she created, Fridays for Future. Off the back of that, you know, there's a whole generation of kids growing up right now that are not content to accept the situation as it is. I mean, we've not seen anything like that before, I don't think. And so I think we are not at risk of not having the voices and the people to create the change and maintain the push for the change that we need. I'm with Paul on that.
We're going to chat for another 5 or so minutes in this half, then have a little break, and then come back and take your questions. And we've got tons of them already. Wherever you're watching this, you can put it in the comments, or you can email zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk. And thank you to the hundreds and hundreds of you of watching all around the world. If I had the time, I would say hello to everybody, but it would take us quite a while to get through those messages right now. Paul, you've called the planet a spaceship. How are the crew currently doing?
Well, the crew are not doing very well. The passengers are doing just fine. We're the passengers having a great time entertaining ourselves, but we're killing the crew. You know, everything from the phytoplankton to the fish to the worms to the trees. And they run the machinery of the life support system of Spaceship Earth. And if we kill too many crew members, machinery will begin to break down, and that's not going to support the passengers, us. So we've got to start supporting the crew of our spaceship, and that's all of those myriad of species that make it possible for us to be here. They're actually more important than we are. You know, a couple of years ago, I was called up by Brett Hume at the Fox Network, and he said, "Did you say that worms and trees and bees are more important than people?" I said, "Yeah, I did say that." He said, "Well, that's outrageous. How can you say anything so outrageous as to imply that?" I said, "Well, it's because it's true. I mean, they can live here without us, but we can't live here without them. So ecologically, they're far more important than we are." He said, "Well, that's just unacceptable." I said, "Well, it might be unacceptable to you, but reality is that they're more important than we are."
Well, I think you said Fox News there, or Fox Network, and I think reality is unacceptable to those people. So you nailed it there.
This is a question from me, and I've been thinking about this for a long time. Why the hell aren't governments doing what you're doing?
Governments have never done anything. Never, ever. They've never solved any social problem in the entire history of civilization. Abraham Lincoln didn't end slavery. That was Wilberforce and Douglas. Wilson didn't give the vote to women in the U.S. He was their main opponent until they won it. He signed the bill, gets the credit for it. That's what governments do. They take credit for all of the initiatives of passionate individuals who make these things possible. Every single social revolution in history was carried out by passionate individuals, not by governments. Politicians are incapable of making any real decision because they know that their political life depends on it. Good example. The conservative Prime Minister of Canada in the 1980s, Joe Clark. actually said, look, Canadians have got to pay the real cost of a gallon of gasoline. And I'm going to raise the price to illustrate that, because we really can no longer subsidize this. We have to pay the real cost. 6 months later, he's no longer prime minister. And that's what we're seeing all the time. Justin Trudeau, at the Paris COP21 conference in Paris, he was the darling of the entire environmental movement. He's going to do this, he's going to do that. He talks the talk, wonderful. He's pro-pipeline, he's pro-tar sands, he's pro-seal hunt, he's pro-fur industry, he's probably reneged on every promise he made to Indigenous peoples. These politicians talk and do nothing. It's always the case. And I don't know a single one. All I can say is Justin Trudeau is probably more honest than Donald Trump, because at least Donald Trump says that, he admits that he's not going to do anything.
I think everybody's more honest than Donald Trump, actually. I can't think of a person that's not. But I share the view that governments, they tend to...
Sorry, what I meant was Donald Trump's more honest, because he's not even pretending. He's not even pretending.
Well, then I'm staggered, actually, to think that Donald Trump is more honest than somebody on the planet. But I take what you're saying. But I share the view that governments don't lead. They don't tend to lead. They tend to follow politicians, talk about what they think people want to hear about. They do the things that they think are going to get them votes. And arguably, what's the fatal flaw here is democracy, the way the system works, because these guys get power by saying the things that people want to hear. They don't get power by presenting the unpalatable truths. In the example you quoted there, Paul, when that happens, they lose their jobs. And I think that holds us back, actually, because we've got to confront some really big realities. Just today, actually, our government launched a 10-point green plan, which was really quite pointless. I think it was very disappointing. And a previous Conservative government came to power promising to run the greenest government ever. But by the time he left, he'd banned onshore wind and solar, and he was calling all of this green crap. And you couldn't have had a bigger vault face. He began his term hugging huskies, literally hugging huskies, and he ended it by banning onshore wind. And so, they face these realities that constituency of voters, or in Cameron's case, this ex-prime minister, it was his party itself that turned on him and forced his big green U-turn. So there's a bit of a problem, I think, in terms of us dealing with these big issues sufficiently, in that democracy, to a degree, gets in the way of that.
Yeah, I don't think we can, for instance, Peter Garrett, Midnight Oil, became the environment minister for Australia, and was one of the worst environment ministers everywhere. Of course, he found Jesus. That was his excuse. But the problem was that he did nothing, even though all the talk beforehand was he's going to make all these significant changes. But it didn't happen.
One of the plastics and single-use plastics and plastics in the ocean has become quite accepted and understood, to the extent that there are campaigns by all the mainstream broadcasters in Europe, at least, and I know in the US there's been campaigns about this sort of stuff too. Is there an issue that's on your radar at the moment, and this is for both of you, that hasn't really got mainstream attention yet? What's the next thing everybody's going to be fixated on that's concerning you?
That's a tough one. I can tell you something new that we're doing. I don't think it's something that everybody's going to get fixated on, but it's kind of relatively new to us in terms of its impact, the scale of it, and that's the diamond mining industry. We began to look into it because we launched this alternative way to make diamonds by mining the sky, and we looked at the impact of diamond mining. The holes that are so big they're visible from outer space, the fact that to make 1 carat of diamond, which is a tiny little stone, you have to blast and dig up 1,100 tons of rock and displace it, burn through about 4,000 liters of water and produce, 110 kilograms of CO2 just to make that one little stone. Obviously, there are big social impacts as well, the way workers are treated, big knock-on environment impacts as well. So for us, that's a new frontier. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there that are aware of the mining industry and the impact it's been having on the world. But we launched this new concept a couple of weeks ago now, Sky Diamonds. And alongside it, we're calling for the end of diamond mining. We're saying we no longer need to mine the earth to make precious stones. We can mine the sky. What we're doing is taking something we have too much of, carbon in the atmosphere, and making something that we quite like to have, diamonds with it, which I think is a great example of 21st century technology, helping us solve the climate crisis, live more sustainably, but still have fun.
I might have been slightly too ambitious when I said, "Is there anything on your radar that people don't know about?" But Paul, from your perspective, if everybody's talking about plastics right now, is there an issue that you think should be getting focused to and attention?
Well, I think that we need to change our entire perspective of the world that we live in. And the thing that we need to get rid of is anthropocentrism, this idea that we're the center of everything, that we're dominant over everything. We have to adapt what indigenous cultures have long held to be believed, and that is biocentrism, that we're part of everything, that we're related to all of these other species, plant and animals and everything. You know, I like to tell people that when people say, talk about saving the ocean, I said, you're really talking about saving yourself, because we are the ocean. This is the planet ocean. The ocean is water in continuous circulation. Sometimes it's in the sea, sometimes it's locked in ice, sometimes underground, sometimes in the clouds, and it's in the cells of every plant and animal on the planet. It's constantly moving. The water in your body was once underground, once in the ice, once in the sky. And we are the ocean. And when you defile one part of it, say the atmosphere, it affects the sea. If you defile the sea, it affects the land. You defile our bodies, it ends up in the sea. It's all part of a continuous, of a continuum. And it's a way of looking at it. We've got to stop thinking about ourselves as better than everything, and really recognize the fact that what we have been are just a bunch of overly conceited naked apes who have been divine legends in our own mind for thousands of years. And we've really got to change that.
Wow, I did not expect us to go there in the first half of this. The one thing that's very, very interesting right now is the number of people on our live stream saying you should both become politicians. How different the world would be with you guys making the decisions. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I were to become a politician, I wouldn't be doing anything. I actually ran for mayor of Vancouver one time, and I was afraid I was going to win because it was looking like I was going to win. I was only running to use it as a forum, and suddenly I saw myself sitting behind a desk for 2 years doing all this stuff that I didn't really want to do.
That's interesting. I think if I was a politician, I wouldn't play by the rule book, you know, the current rule book. And politics, I do find interesting right now, because I feel that to get to zero carbon, and I'm focused on Britain here, but it applies to every country of the world. You know, there are three big sectors of society that need to pull together. It's people, business, and governments. And I think increasingly people are getting the need to change how they live. Businesses can see that, and they're responding with the kinds of things people need to buy: vegan food, electric cars, green energy. You know, these are great examples. And between us, businesses and people, we've come a long way. But what we're really lacking is a government that gets it, and they could do so much. In Britain, for example, we've got a planning system that is actually in favor of fossil fuels. And we've got subsidies that tip towards fossil fuels, 10 billion a year given to fossil fuels, and I think it's 6 billion given to renewable energy. So this is in the hands of government. These are the levers governments pull: taxes, subsidies, and regulations. The government could change all of this. We could change the planning system to ban fossil fuels and be in favor of renewable energy. We could transition from the subsidies for fossil fuels, take that money and give it to renewable energy. Over a period of 5 years, we could go from 10 billion of subsidies for fossil fuels to nothing. And it wouldn't cost us anything to have that 10 billion shifted to renewable energy. There are so many changes that the government could make to make the playing field more level, and actually tip it in the favor of the good way of doing things and away from the bad way of doing things. And I think more than anything else right now, the power is in the hands of government to be the final piece of this puzzle we need to get to zero carbon sustainable living.
Yeah, I should also point out that, you know, these are my particular views, but the strength of an ecosystem is in diversity. Therefore, the strength of any movement has to be in diversity. And whether that approach is education or litigation or legislation or direct action, it doesn't really matter, as long as each and every one of us take a course of action and get involved.
I agree.
We've got so many questions. We're going to have a little break for a minute so Paul and Dale can go and get a drink. Well, they're doing that. If you're in the UK and you're new to Ecotricity, you can go to ecotricity.co.uk/Sea Shepherd. And if you go there and switch to Ecotricity, it takes a couple of minutes to switch to us as an energy provider. We will give a £60 donation, or an up to £60 donation to Sea Shepherd every year. That's if you bring your gas and your electricity to us. So we're going to play a little video now, and we're going to be back in just a moment. We've got so many questions. I'm going to see if Paul can stay for a little bit longer, because we've got so many questions for both of them coming. But we'll be back just after these few short commercial messages.
I remember in 2008 standing on the bridge of the Steve Irwin as our helicopter pilot narrated each agonizing minute and second that it took for a minke whale to die on the end of a harpoon. What I see every single day in Africa is that suffering replicated thousands and hundreds of thousands of times over, on the sharks who are bycatch, on the whales caught in nets, and on the fish that ultimately get thrown into the fish holes. This is where we can make the biggest difference.
In the northern Gulf of California, the sea is teeming with life. However, these waters have become a death trap to the animals that live here due to the illegal nets. Sea Shepherd's Milagro campaign puts us in between poaching and the murder of marine wildlife, such as the world's most endangered marine mammal, the vaquita.
The state of the oceans right now is exceptionally serious. Almost every commercial fishing operation is in a state of diminishment or decline. The oceans are dying, and if they die, we die. It's as simple as that. What makes the difference really in the conservation movements? It's really the passion of individuals, and that's what's always made the difference. That's what has changed the world.
Just over my shoulder here is our first windmill. We built it in 1996 and it was a groundbreaking windmill back then for Britain. In 2010 we built Britain's first sun park using solar panels to harness the power of the sun and make electricity. That all came to an end a couple of years later when the government basically shut the industry down. But the great news is it's back, and it's back this year without the need for any kind of government support. We've got 3 projects that have got planning permission, we've got grid for them, we're getting ready to start building, and that's what we're going to do. Using our bills into mills model, taking the money from our customers' energy bills and putting it into building new forms of green energy. So just to explain bills into mills, if you've not heard it before or you're not really sure exactly what it means, it's our way of describing our model. It's unique. There's no other company, as far as I know, in the world that does the same thing. We take the money that we make from our customers' energy bills and we put it back into building new forms of green energy, windmills, sun mills, and things like that. We're a not-for-dividend company. It means that all of the money we make stays in the company and stays here being spent on our mission, which is to change the way energy is made in Britain. You can fight climate change with your energy bill. It's one of the biggest things anybody can do to change to a green energy provider, but particularly to us because we use that money to build new forms of green energy. We don't just buy and sell something that already exists. We make the stuff, and all of our customers play their part. When you pay your energy bill, you help us build new forms of green energy. You help us fight climate change.
Well, thank you. If you're still with us, thank you very much. I have just been spending the last 4 minutes reading all of the questions that you've sent in and trying to work out how I can present them all to Paul and Dale. So what we're going to do, keep sending them in wherever you're watching. You can send questions in. I'm going to try and get through as many of these. Some of them apply to both Dale and Paul, and some of them apply to either one of them. But we're going to try and get through this all and make sure that you hear equally from both of them. That's my job as the person moderating them, I guess. This is from a guy called Mark. The Trump administration seems hell-bent on weakening the Marine Mammal Protection Act and ignored your calls for the US government to boycott New Zealand fisheries because of their destruction of the Maui dolphin. Do you envisage that situation improving under Biden?
Well, we certainly hope so. We are suing the United States government right now for discriminating by not sanctioning fish products from New Zealand while they do so to Mexico. So, you know, they're stopping the fish products coming from Mexico to protect the vaquita. Why aren't they doing it for the Maui dolphin? I guess the answer is one's New Zealand, one's Mexico. But I think it's certainly going to be better than it has been under Trump. I mean, anybody would be better. But I think it's also going to be going back to what it was, the normal, as it was called. And really, once again, corporations of Wall Street and everything will be calling the shots. But it can't be any worse than what it's been for the last 4 years.
And Dale, your view on Biden. Is Biden going to be great for the planet, or what's your view?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, particularly in contrast to Trump, you can't not compare him to that, because that's what we've had for the last 4 years. For example, he'll rejoin the Paris Accord. He said that, so that's going to happen imminently, I would imagine. And we'll get back to, as Paul said, what we used to think of as normal, which, of course, we never thought was good enough. But having had it taken away from us, we quite like the idea of it now. I don't think he'll be radical. He'll just be radical compared to Trump and what we've been used to for the last few years. But that will be, its own good thing.
Here's a message from Rob on Facebook, and he's saying to both of you, is there any reason to be cheerful?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Trump just lost. I mean, I think that is just brilliant. And, the world is a better place overnight because of that. And, here in Britain, we've got our own domestic kind of Trump version of Trump. And he just lost his right-hand man this week as well, which was fantastic news. Lots of reasons to be cheerful, but, and good things are happening everywhere as well. I mean, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Also keep in mind that I've always felt that the answer to an impossible problem is to find the impossible solution. And that can be found through the virtues of passion, courage, and imagination. The year 1972, the very idea that Nelson Mandela would one day be president of South Africa was unthinkable and therefore impossible. But it had happened. So the impossible can become possible.
Here's a big question. Here's a big question for you. Jack on Facebook says, why are we still building nuclear power stations? And how damaging is nuclear power to marine wildlife? How do we stop them building them?
Well, I want to say the reason we're still building them is because they take so long. And actually, they started a very long time ago and they still haven't finished. But that's a little bit tongue in cheek. There's one being built in Britain at the moment, Hinkley. It's going to be the most expensive construction project ever. It'll make the most expensive electricity ever made. It's over 100 billion, I think. It's already 10 years late and over budget. That's the way of nuclear power. And it ought to be the very last thing that we build that's nuclear powered. I don't know if it will be, because this week, Rolls-Royce put their heads up above the parapet and said to the government, we can build a whole bunch of mini nukes, some kind of nuclear proliferation nightmare. They want to spread a bunch of mini nukes around the country if the government will just kindly sign an order for, I think it was 36 billion quid, and underwrite half the research costs. And I think they said they'd create like 6,000 jobs or something. If you do the maths on that, they're very expensive jobs. And it would be electricity that's 1/3 more expensive than Hinkley, apparently, which was already crazy expensive. So nuclear energy is bonkers. And that's before you get into the toxic waste that has a half-life longer than recorded human history. So I have no idea how it ever got going and why it still goes. What can we do to shut it down? I think we won't get a chance in Britain now for another 4 years for an election to elect a completely different kind of government with a different mindset. And when we get that chance, I think we will have that option. But right now, there's not a lot we can do. Although we can use the courts. As Paul mentioned, that he's suing the US over fishery discrimination. We're suing our government over renewable energy discrimination. Funnily enough, the planning policy that is actually in favor of fossil fuels, that is prejudiced in favor of fossil fuels and against renewable energy. We've challenged that in the courts, and it looks like we're on the verge of winning that, and that policy will change because it's inconsistent with our Paris climate commitments and our 2050 zero carbon target.
There's two powerful reasons why we don't need nuclear energy, and one is Fukushima, the other one's Chernobyl. I think that gave us enough. That should have given us a lesson in why we shouldn't go forward with that. Right now, they're considering dumping millions of gallons of radioactive waste into the Pacific Ocean, and that was an accident that happened almost a decade ago. It just never goes away.
Here's one for you, Paul. This is Debbie on the Sea Shepherd Facebook page. Question for the captain. How many campaigns are active at the moment, and how's COVID affected them?
Well, Sea Shepherd is really more of a movement than anywhere. I can't even keep track of how many campaigns we have right now. I know that we're doing anti-poaching campaigns in African waters, in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean. We're sending a vessel now to work with Peru to stop poaching there. Another vessel is going to Colombia to protect Mapalo Island. We're in the Gulf of California protecting the vaquita. We have an anti-poaching unit on the island of Mayotte right now between Madagascar and Mozambique protecting turtles. So there's actually more campaigns that I can keep track of, and that's a great advantage of having really a movement, is that you don't have to oversee every little thing. And we got some terrific leaders, or terrific captains who are undertaking these responsibilities and doing really well with it.
Here's one from Ellie. Who are the worst offenders, Japan or Norway, for whale hunting?
Now it's Norway. Norway's killing more whales, and I think we're not getting involved with Japan now. People say, why don't you go to Japan and carry on for what we did in the Southern Ocean? We won in the Southern Ocean. They're no longer there. The worst thing we can do now is to go to Japan, because the nationalists in Japan would love nothing better. Whaling is dying. It's a dying industry in Japan. It exists only because of massive subsidies, and we don't want to go in there and throw gasoline on the fire and get them all fired up again. So we'll just let it die. As Norway's the real problem. And the Faroe Islands are, of course, another problem. Iceland, by the way, hasn't killed any whales for the last 2 years, and I'm quite confident that it's pretty much dead there too. But you have to look at the success story that's been. When we began this in 1974, since then, I would say 95% of all whaling operations have been shut down. We shut down Spain and Chile and Peru and Australia. All of these countries were whaling nations. My lifelong ambition is to eradicate whaling before I die, and pretty much only 5% left to go, I think.
Here's one for you, Dale. Christine on Twitter says, I've heard a little bit about your book. Can I buy it internationally, and what's it about?
Yeah, I believe it is available internationally in all kinds of bookshops. I think you were telling me the other day, Will. The book itself is like part biography, part mission statement, with a plan at the end in chapter 13. It's called Manifesto. And really, it kind of more or less starts with my life on the road. I spent 10 years living as a traveler, living in all kinds of different vehicles, a few different countries, experienced a lot of different things. And I kind of got a lot from that. And then I had an epiphany, living on a hill, decided to drop back in, try and build a big windmill. And that was the beginning of this whole ecotricity journey, and using business to try and change the world, to bring about an environment end. And I've spent probably 20, 25 years doing that now. And it's all kind of condensed into that book, into a narrative, my life on the road and in business. And this plan, which I'm most excited about, is chapter 13. It pulls together the themes of all of our work at Ecotricity on energy, transport, and food. It looks at the technology, where it is today, what's coming in the next few years, and basically puts together the whole jigsaw puzzle in terms of how we get to zero carbon as a nation, including what the government needs to do, what businesses need to do, and what people need to do. So I'm really most excited about that, and getting it into as many hands as possible. All of the proceeds from the book are going to environment causes, including Sea Shepherd. And finally I wrote a book. I wrote it in lockdown. Took about a month of intense work, and I'm interested to see where it goes.
Paul's going to mark me on this one. What's Paul's view of the Tristan da Cunha Marine Protection Zone? Will it make a difference?
Well, I think all these marine protection zones and sanctuaries make a difference, but the downside of it is that that's where the poachers go, to these sanctuaries. So what the solution to this is, we really need enforcement. A sanctuary doesn't mean anything without enforcement. So that's what we're trying to assist governments around the world by doing these partnerships that we now have with Peru and Colombia, with Mexico and Gabon and Benin and Tanzania and Namibia and these other countries. Partnering an NGO like us with those governments, we give them the resources, the ships, the crew, and everything, and what they give us is authority, the ability to actually uphold their own laws. Outside of territorial waters, however, we're on our own. We can only operate under the guidance of the United Nations World Charter for Nature, which allows for non-government organizations to intervene. But of course, that's quite controversial, because people say that we're vigilantes, but we will be vigilantes unless the governments of the world can get together and actually find a way to police international waters, because that's where most of the damage is being done.
Julie on Facebook says, post-Brexit, what would be the best change to UK fisheries policy? She can think of a few things, but is interested to hear Paul's view.
Well, what I said at COP21 in Paris in 2015 is that if we want to protect our oceans, we need to give the ocean the opportunity to repair the damage that we've done to it. That means we need at least a 50-year, if not permanent, moratorium on all industrialized fishing operations. We have to shut it down. If we don't shut it down, there won't be any fisheries by 2050 because there won't be any fish. You know, for thousands of years in Polynesia, the shamans had this thing called kapu, which they would declare an area kapu, for instance, a bay in Bora Bora. This bay is kapu, no fishing. Anybody caught fishing in that bay during that 20-year period, it was a death penalty. And people say, oh, that's a little extreme. No, because they understood that if the fish disappeared, so did they. Their entire survival depended upon that. So today there are no kapu areas. There's no place for the fish to hide. There's no way to get respite. And so that's what we need. We need this moratorium. And if we don't, then the future is looking very, very bleak indeed.
Here's another question from Facebook. Okay, guys, I know you get asked this all the time, but what's the best thing somebody like me can do to reduce my negative impact on the planet?
You can go vegan.
Yeah, that would be my go-to answer as well, actually. Biggest, easiest thing, change what you eat, stop eating animals. Absolutely.
I noticed that there was one question, and it was actually from an engineer on the Greenpeace boat Esperanza about us using fossil fuels, you know, to go after poachers. And I actually agree with them. We shouldn't be using fossil fuels, but we can't catch the poachers any other way. But I do believe that when people say that we should be carbon neutral, I think that we are actually, because we've shut down hundreds of poaching vessels, and those are poaching vessels that are no longer using fossil fuels. So there's actually a lot less fossil fuels being burned now because of our interventions than what we're using to intervene. Although we have one sailing vessel, I wish we could have a whole fleet of sailing vessels, but unfortunately the opposition doesn't use sails, and there I haven't been able to figure out. Although in the future there may be alternatives like you know, hydrogen or other various alternatives, and maybe we can get a windmill-powered vessel. You know, like I think Cousteau was yeah, had one like that. But it's the speed that really we have a problem. We need, if we're going to be an anti-poaching effective on anti-poaching, we need to catch these guys.
You were talking, Dale, about battery-powered hovercrafts at one point, weren't you?
Yes, that's right. It's an idea that came up a few weeks ago. Maybe it's a few months ago now, actually. And I quite like the idea. As I was a kid, I wanted to make a hovercraft and never had the parts, but I kind of got into the design of them. And I recalled that a few months ago when somebody just out of the blue sent me an email saying, oh, we built hovercrafts, you know, would you like to buy one? And I pinged back and said, do you make an electric one? And they came straight back to me and said, no, but if somebody provides the bits, the motors and the batteries and stuff, then we will. So I got onto the guy that helped design the Nemesis, the electric supercar we built in the around about 2010, Peter Stevens, and we put our heads together. And then I reached out to Rob at Sea Shepherd UK and said, you know, you guys, have you got a use for an electric hovercraft? Because I wondered if they didn't. They're quite excited about it, and I am as well. We're going to start building it, I hope, in the new year, and it's going to be really interesting, but it's totally feasible. Certainly there won't be any kind of loss of speed or loss of payload. The one issue will be that with a petrol engined hovercraft, you can fill it up again pretty quickly. With a battery powered one, that'll be more difficult. But we've got a couple of other ideas as well for enhancements to that. So this will be a coastal hovercraft, you know, kind of 2-man with all of the nav equipment on it and stuff like that, you know, pretty practical. And so I'm a little bit excited about this pretty small project, but we see where it goes.
Well, I'm very excited about that too, because many, many years ago when I was in the Canadian Coast Guard, I was an officer on board the hovercraft search and rescue. So got a lot of on utilizing them.
Here's a good one for you. Hey, Paul, the Sea Shepherd education site is just wonderful. Do you plan to collaborate to reach more families and children who don't get as good access to resources?
Well, we'd like to, of course. That Rob Reed and Sea Shepherd UK are overseeing that, and I'm sure that that's the way they would go. I don't have all the details on it, but it is very important that we have educational programs. And we get contacted by young people all the time about this. And, we put out documentaries, but we also put out children's books too. And I think that, this is the future, and children. Here's the thing that I've always found about children. You don't really have to teach them anything. You just have to encourage them, because children have a natural intuition, a natural understanding of how the world works and what we need to do. And we just need to encourage them. So we don't tell them what to do. We just sort of give them the tools to pursue the path that they choose to do.
The website is education.seashepherd.org.uk. I've also been told that there's currently a children's design a ship competition, which is being judged by Dale. So if you go to education.seashepherd.org.uk, you can find plenty of information there. Here's a question from Paul on Facebook. Who do you consider to be the most progressive country at the moment in terms of environmental and ethical stuff? What are they doing, and why are they the most progressive?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough one. But I would say, I think that the countries that we're working with, the African and Latin American countries that we're working with, have really demonstrated that they are being progressive by partnering with us. We started this partnership back in 1999 with the Galapagos Marine Reserve. And I think that now we're getting invited by some of these governments to intervene, because they can see that we can cut through the red tape and we can assist them. So I guess I would say our partner countries, would be, whether it be Benin, Sao Tome, Peru, Colombia, Mexico. That's from my point of view, anyway.
I'm a fan of Europe, actually. I like the policies on renewable energy, on getting to zero carbon. I think it's a really progressive block of countries in terms of social as well as environment protections, labor laws, that kind of stuff. Obviously, I think it's a great shame that we're leaving in a couple of weeks' time. But I'm a fan of Europe. I think they tend to lead the way globally on big environment issues. That's my view.
Now, the joy of doing a live stream and not having spoken about this before, I'm hoping that both Paul and Dale can stay for a little longer, because we've had a message in from somebody saying, this is way more exciting than I'm a Celebrity, get me out of here. Now, Paul, you won't know what the hell that is, but that's a reality show that's currently on in the UK that everybody's talking about. But it would seem people are choosing to stay tuned into you guys rather than go and watch a load of celebrities freeze their asses off in a Welsh castle. Here's one from Natalie on Facebook. If we carry out without fundamental change, how long do you think we have life as we know it?
Well, in my opinion, probably less than a century. Because if we have ecological collapse, which is brought about through climate change and through diminishment of carrying capacity, then we're not going to survive. It's as simple as that. So we're going to have to, to find ways of, using energy in a way that isn't harmful to the environment, and also making sure that we utilize resources without causing diminishment. We have to solve those problems, or we're not going to have a future.
Yeah, I would say that actually we already don't have life as we know it. The coronavirus has interrupted that, and that's a man-made problem. And I think climate change, the climate crisis, is increasingly interrupting life in different parts of the world. It's worse, certainly worse than it is here in Britain, but it's happening. Extreme weather is causing problems. And I think the climate crisis itself in the next 10 years will make itself felt, even more. And I think, Paul, your answer is really about the end of life in 100 years. I think that actually the loss of life as we came to know it, I think that's already begun. And I think that'll happen much faster than that. I would say the next 10 or 20 years, and we'll see some radical changes to the way that we live.
Also, I think, what we experience as somebody, I turn 70 next month. In my generation, the freedoms and the materialism that we enjoyed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we'll never see it again. It just won't happen.
Here is one from Terry on Facebook. Hi, Paul and Dale. Really enjoying the stream. How do you think China fits into a sustainable future, and what can we do about it?
The question is, what are the Chinese going to do about it? The one advantage I have with that I see that China has is that they take science seriously, I believe, and and they do respond. For instance, we caught a Chinese drift net in the Indian Ocean using illegal drift nets, chased them all the way back to China. And when we got to the borders, there was Chinese warships there. And the fishermen said, we're being pursued by these pirates. And the Navy vessels radioed us and said, what's this all about? And we explained it to them. We caught these guys using illegal drift nets. We've documented the whole thing. And you know what they did? Bring them in. And we escorted them to the mainland. Those captains were all arrested. The ships were fined, and they all lost their licenses. So they did respond to the evidence. And I find that China will respond to evidence, but they're under, of course, enormous pressure because of their population and, you know, all of the demands that are needed. But, you know, we can't look on China as the boogeyman here. They're not, you know, everything they're doing, we're doing. I mean, the European fishing fleets are just as bad as the Asian fishing fleets. Both of them are looting and plundering the waters of Africa. And, you know, piracy in Africa, these aren't real pirates in Somalia, and we're now seeing them in West Africa. In fact, last week we were actually attacked by pirates. But they're not really pirates. They're impoverished fishermen who've been forced into that situation because the real pirates have been in there plundering their resources. And so that's what we should address. Stop our piracy, Asian and European piracy, in order to, you know, to ensure that the peoples in Africa and the peoples in like Asia and everything have what they need. You know, a few years ago, the Norwegian drag trawler fleet went down the coast of India, took everything, put 1 million Indian fishermen out of work. And, you know, nobody said anything because, well, they're Indians, you know. We're more concerned about 5 or 6 people working on a trawler somewhere out of an English port that might lose their job. But in fact, the damage that's being done by industrialized fishing is affecting the entire planet.
Yeah, for my part, I don't think China is the bogeyman either or at all, actually. I think they're in an interesting position because they've got one advantage, I think, over us. I say us, but I mean most of the Western world. They don't have democracy. And so when they see a problem like the climate crisis, and they do see it, they set themselves about fixing it. They set out a plan and they go after it, and you know they're going to hit it. I think it was recently they set out to be zero carbon by 2050 and to reach peak emissions. I think it was by 2030, but I'm not really sure. But it was hugely ambitious given the size of the population and the rate at which they're still developing as an economy. But if you look at renewable energy, an awful lot of windmills and probably most of the world's solar panels are made in China. If you look at the electrification of transport, electric buses are on the roads in China in the hundreds of thousands. So I would say that, you know, China is probably ahead of us here in Britain in terms of renewable energy deployment, the rate at which they are deploying it, and certainly in the production of technology and in the electrification of transport as well. I think China has a lot to offer, actually, to help us as a world solve this problem. And is probably a little bit, I hope anyway, a little bit of a hangover of the Trump era to see China as the villain of the piece. It is a different political system to what we're used to, but that doesn't make it wrong.
Also, our film Chasing the Thunder, the Chinese will be airing it in their theaters next month.
That's awesome. We've got about 10 or so minutes left. So if you've got a question and you haven't brought it into us yet, do send it in. We're going to try and get through as many as we can. If you're looking to buy Dale's book, Manifesto, it's out on the 26th of November and it's £20 if you buy it from shop.ecotricity.co.uk. Sea Shepherd UK will be posting on its social media a special link. And with that link, if you buy it, we donate £9 from every copy sold back to Sea Shepherd. So if you're a Sea Shepherd follower and fan, that's a great way to get hold of Dale's book. And Dale is signing copies. And I saw his face earlier when I told him he had another 50 copies to sign. So the more you buy, the more he has to sign, the more Dale feels like he might get cramp in his hand because he's signing hundreds and hundreds of books. Here is one for Dale. A question. What are your thoughts, Dale, about both shallow and deep geothermal energy? Is it something that you at Ecotricity might try and pursue in the future?
That's an interesting question. I got to wonder if that's planted, Will.
It's not, Dale. Definitely not planted by me.
That's a brilliant question then, because we're about to go public with a story. I think it's Britain's first geothermal power station These guys have been running tests for a few months down in Cornwall, and we've signed up to buy the power from it. It'll be the first geothermal electricity in the grid in Britain. And I hope I don't preempt the press story here. I may have just done that, but the story goes out in a couple of days anyway. And I think geothermal is pretty exciting. I think it's got a lot to offer. Somebody came to see me, I think it was a couple of years ago, and they said they developed some deep geothermal technology. The big issue is the cost of drilling deep enough to find the right kind of heat if you're not in the ideal geological location. These guys, they said their technology was right to get down several kilometers to solve that problem, and it meant that they could drill at the site of existing fossil fueled power stations, and they could use the existing infrastructure, the steam turbines, the grid connections and everything. And I thought that was just amazing as a concept, that we could repower fossil fueled power stations into geothermal power stations.
As Ecotricity's head of press, I'm waiting for my mobile phone to ring right now as a result of what you've just revealed there. Here's a really good one from Joanne on Facebook, and this is to you both. How are you coping with isolation?
I have no problem.
Yeah, I think I was made for what do you call it, social distancing. When I first heard the term in March, I kind of shrugged and thought, you know what, I like the sound of that. It kind of suits me personally. Not that I'm anti-social or anything like that, but I kind of like a bit of social distance. I enjoyed the first lockdown that went on for a few months. I got stuck into a few different things, and but I'm the kind of person that just makes the most of what's around. I've been in lots of different circumstances in my life, and just get on with it. So I'm fine with it.
And I live in a pretty isolated area anyway, and I get to spend more time. I got a 4-year-old son, so I get to spend a lot more time with him.
Here's one for you. Paul, do you ever get scared with all these confrontations on the seas?
No, never been scared. It's what I've been doing all my life. And I find it actually quite adventurous, really, always have.
Dale, and that's, I guess, I'm not suggesting you're having the same escapades on the high seas, but have you ever got scared about any of the kind of the legal battles or the fights you've had in trying to make the world's first green energy company?
There have been some moments, probably 10, 15 years ago, at the height of quite an intense legal confrontation with a water company, I would say, when it crossed my mind, or it crossed somebody else's mind. Somehow it entered the conversation and the imagination that there might be a physical threat combined with all of the other threats that are out there. But it's not the kind of thing that worries me or would deter me. I'm a lot like Paul. For me, it's partly an adventure, partly a necessity. I really feel the need to do the things that I do, and nothing will stop me from doing that.
I'm going to try and keep Paul and Dale for 10 more minutes, but if we're going to keep them for 10 more minutes, you've got to make sure you go and switch to Ecotricity if you're a Sea Shepherd supporter, and we'll give up to £60 back to Sea Shepherd every year. Or you can go to the Sea Shepherd UK website to see how you can help as a volunteer. It's about raising awareness, valuable funds. You can get involved in beach cleans, ghost net dives, and you can do schools visits too. So there's loads of information there on the Sea Shepherd UK website. Here's a question for Paul, and this is from Betty on Facebook. Hi, Paul. Have you heard of the Save Our Seas Act in the US? Is it going to make a difference? And do you have advocates and relationships with anybody in the US Congress?
No, I don't have any. We don't really work, on that level, really. We're not lobbyists or anything. But, again, all of these things, whether Save Our Seas, all of these laws are only meaningful if there's enforcement. And I do have to say in the U.S. that when it comes to poachers, there is strong enforcement. So we don't have to do a lot in U.S. waters because of that. But we certainly need stronger environmental laws. I mean, especially after the last 4 years. I mean, and also I don't know what kind of damage Trump's going to do on his way out. He just announced he wants to sell off the Alaska Wildlife Refuge to the fossil fuel companies, and he could do that in the next 2 months. I'm not sure what Biden can do to overturn that. But I am looking forward to Biden using his ability to issue executive orders, because all the executive orders of a president can be countermanded by the incoming president. Executive orders are very easily changed. So I think that Biden will probably be spending his first month just overturning all of these horrible executive orders that Trump brought into being.
Linked into that one, Paul, how well do you think US domestic waters are regulated, say, compared to UK and the EU? And this is Colin. He says he watched Dark Waters last week about DuPont and Teflon chemical damage.
Well, I think and what we're involved with poaching, it's very well regulated. But when you're talking about pollution, yeah, well, that's another thing too. So I think that these corporations get away with a lot of damages. And hopefully that may change under this new administration.
I just want to say hello to the person that's now posted 15 times, Paul is badass. Yes, we know Paul is badass, and we've got the message, it's received. So, another question for you. What keeps you both motivated to continue the journey towards sustainability when you find so much resistance in your way?
Maybe it's the resistance that actually helps, to do that. But I just feel motivated. I feel kind of committed. There's stuff that needs to be done. I feel passionately that it needs to be done, and I want to do it. I kind of it feels innate. I would say it's not something I ever have to discuss with myself. It's just something I really want to do. So I just keep on really doing it.
As I mentioned earlier, focusing on the present, and therefore there's no real reason to be depressed about the future because you don't have time to do that. Just focus on the present. Try to make those changes in the present. I often jokingly say that, look, what's the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing is happens that we fail. Well, this is what's called the sixth major extinction event in world history. Now look at all the other ones that came before us, the 5 major extinction events in world history. And what did they all have in common? 17 to 20 million years for full recovery. So if we fail 20 million years from now, it'd be a really beautiful planet. We just won't be here.
We're into our final 10 minutes now. Here's one from Liz. Paul, I can't believe you're going to be 70 70 next month. A question for you both. Anything you would advise to your younger selves?
I would probably, if I could do anything over, I'd probably be more aggressive than I was in certain situations. And that's the only regret that I have, really.
Yeah, I don't think I have any. And I'm not a fan of giving advice. I definitely wouldn't try to have given it to myself when I was younger because I want the person that would take advice. I'm still not. But I look back because I got to, in the writing of this book, at how I've lived and the things I've done. And although I didn't always choose every step of that, and it was never a plan, I like it. I like what's happened to me. I like where I am. And like Paul, I wouldn't change a thing.
Matt on Facebook asks, Paul, what's the best I can do to help support Sea Shepherd's efforts?
Well, you can get involved by, you can volunteer to crew on the ships. You could be a shore volunteer, become a member of a chapter, or, get involved with beach cleanups or any of the other activities, or just be a supporting contributor. There's many levels that you can get involved in. I think right now we have about 200 volunteers from about 25 different nations that are participating in the campaigns.
I heard you say you had an 86-year-old lady crewing and helping with one of your ships at one point.
Yes, she was British also, yes.
That's incredible. Marin on Facebook says, what can an ordinary citizen do to help protect the oceans?
Well, again, as we had mentioned earlier, adapting a vegan diet certainly goes a long ways. We've got to really get this moratorium on industrial fishing. If not, put as much consumer pressure on as possible to achieve that. But also to think about the fact that whatever you do on land or whatever you put into the air, it all involves this one thing called the ocean, which is ourselves. I mean, even when you put drugs or plastics or whatever you use in your personal life, it all ends up in the ocean. So even when you poison yourself, you're poisoning. Not many people even stop to think about this. For instance, I know the statistics for Canada, for instance. 17 tons of mercury vapor goes into the atmosphere every year from crematoriums. So, we don't think about the fact that when our automobile tires lose tiny pieces, microplastics of all the time, every time they run, and it all ends up in the ocean. So we don't think about these little things that make a huge contribution overall.
Linked question there from Fred on Facebook. Paul, can you give a brief description on how plastic from the Midwest states makes it into our oceans?
Well, what it does is it gets washed down into rivers, and from rivers and streams. Again, it's all part of a circulatory system, a planetary circulatory system. So all things end up there. What are rivers anyway? They're like the veins of the earth, and water is the blood of the earth. So they do the same thing. They bring nourishment to the land, and they take away waste, and that waste ends up in the ocean. And the estuaries and that's the kidneys and everything circulates. The sun pulls it out of the ocean and drops it back onto the land again. Everything is circulating. So whatever you put into your local stream or river is going to end up in the ocean. In fact, things that you put in your body are going to end up in the ocean.
And your toilet.
We're on the homeward straight now. Two final questions. Dale, one for you. This is from Ollie on Facebook. Do you think the UK's net zero plan is realistic, and is £12 billion going to be enough to do it?
My answer is to laugh. It's not 12 billion. It's probably, in terms of new money, it's reckoned to be 4 billion. So that's about 1% of what we've spent this year fighting the coronavirus. So it's quite pathetic. Today's 10-point plan, if that's what you're referring to, Ollie, absolutely not. In terms of zero carbon plan, if you mean our government plan to be zero carbon by 2050, I say definitely not, because it's just not soon enough. We need to take big steps as soon as possible and get to zero carbon much faster than that. So whichever way you look at it, government's own climate change committee are telling them that they're falling behind. They're going to miss their interim targets. That today's announcement's done nothing to help that. Bringing forward the banning of internal combustion engine cars to 2030 is really just hiding behind the motor industry, which is going to do that anyway. Again, it's a great example of governments not leading, but just following, as we talked about earlier. So whichever way you look at it, this government is not doing enough. So no, the plans of the government and the budgets of the government are woeful, I would say.
James on Twitter asks you both, what's the proudest moment of your lives? And I'm going to wait to see Dale's eyes roll, because Dale doesn't like talking about being proud about stuff. But what's the biggest or proudest moment of your life so far?
Well, for me, I would say it's taking Sea Shepherd, which was an organization, and turning it into a global movement, and getting so many, thousands of people involved in actively addressing these problems.
And as you say, Will, I've got an issue, a kind of character issue with the concept of pride and feeling it. And I don't feel pride at what I've done, Ecotricity or something like that. I can feel proud of other people. I can feel proud of what the team at Ecotricity have done, for example. But most recently, I've been excited by being able to float this Sky Diamond concept, putting it out there in the world. I'm just kind of most excited that we're able to crack that issue and do something quite incredible, that little bit of modern alchemy. And that's what I live for, really, to create solutions to the problems that we're facing, and to be a part of introducing them, and to see them kind of take root and make progress. I kind of live for that, but for me, there's no pride in that. There's just fun. So
I just want to say thank you very much, gentlemen. You've got a chance for closing thoughts in a minute. You can follow Dale on Facebook, facebook.com/Dale Vince. Captain Paul is Capt Paul Watson on Facebook. Dale is at Dale Vince on Twitter, and Paul is at Capt Paul Watson on Twitter. You can switch to Ecotricity if you're in the UK and you want to switch to a renewable energy provider. We are known as the UK's greenest energy provider. You can switch to us by going ecotricity.co.uk/Sea Shepherd, and that's where we will donate up to £60 a year to Sea Shepherd UK. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Closing thoughts from you both. Anything you want to say to the audience?
Do you want to go first, Paul?
Well, I wish we had ecotricity here in Vermont, I'll tell you that. We don't have the option, unfortunately. But
that's nice. We're fortunate to have Sea Shepherd here in Britain, I would say, in return. Listen, I've just really enjoyed it, Paul. It's been great to kind of see you again. It's been a long time since we met up and chatted, and these Facebook events, I'm kind of really enjoying them. I'm loving taking part in conferences now by Zoom and stuff like that. You know, this is one of the gifts of lockdown, I think, the chance to connect without moving. You know, I'm loving that. But it's been great to see you again, and I just love the work that Sea Shepherd does and the things that you're doing.
well, good. Maybe in the future when Britain allows me in, I can visit again.
Yeah, nice one.
And based by the popular demand and the comments that people, I think, would love you guys to get together again in the future at some point on social media for another of these chats. It's been hundreds and hundreds of comments. So thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day, Paul.
I would like to apologize for all of those questions that we just didn't have a chance to respond to. But I did see many of them, and but unfortunately, we just didn't have a chance to respond.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
What do you think it is? How long? 60 feet.
Inflatable carries 4 police officers armed with machine guns, tear gas, bombs. Over.
It's police, then why are they after you?
I've got a statement here from our clients, so we're going to play that on the loudspeaker. Please remove yourself from these waters. You're in violation of international conservation regulations. We're acting in accordance with the United Nations World Charter for Nature and implementing these regulations. You're in a whale sanctuary and you're assisting in illegal activity. Remove yourself from these waters immediately. Immediately. Please remove yourself from these waters. You're in violation.